my pleasure to introduce the main speaker for tonight, Marilyn S.
Hello, I am Marilyn and I am an alcoholic. And I am really thrilled to be here. I love Colorado, I love Denver, and I'm especially grateful to Patrick and Alex for the invitation to come here, and also to Tracy for opening up her own home to some of us tonight for dinner. And my dear friend Becky, who, goodness, she drove to Denver Airport, where I flew in from Los Angeles, and we both found each other at Denver Airport after much searching and train rides, and so that's quite an accomplishment, I think. Thank you, Becky. She found me. I'm here because I drank a little bit too much. At first it was really, really good. It was the answer to problems, but then it turned on me. So that's why I'm here tonight, but it didn't start out that way. It started out so nicely. I'd always wanted to be a scientist, and I thought if I could be a scientist, then I could be a happy person. I had a saintly mom who saved money so I could go away to school. I went away to a good school and I studied science, and I met and I married a scientist. And so things were looking good, but I was still absolutely miserable. And I don't know why I was so miserable, but it was the feeling that this just is not really quite what I wanted. I don't quite know what it is, but I know I'm not there yet. And what I wanted was more. And I wanted everybody to treat me right, and they weren't doing that back in Ohio. And I used to think, what do I want? I mean, I would want to be able to walk into a room like this, and for everybody to just stop talking as I walked through the door and begin to murmur, Marilyn, Marilyn, and kind of come toward me and maybe kiss my ring, and that's what I want. And but if I got that, about 5 minutes later, my thought would be, you don't really mean it, do you? I just know that, because that's the way I was living. Every gift, every right thing just wasn't right. After I thought about it for a while, it wasn't enough. As I said, I just wanted more. And we moved to California, and by that time I was working in a lab. I was working on a research project, had a white lab coat. I had a great director, gave me a research project, everything that one would need to have an academic career in science. And I just looked around the lab and I thought, you know, I'm really a fraud. I look like a scientist now, but I don't feel like one. And I think everybody is just not really helping me enough, and never occurred to me to help anybody else. It was just, what are you going to do for me? And so here I was at this place in my life where I'd gotten just about everything that I thought would make me happy, and I was more miserable than ever. Had I had the benefit of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would understand that I didn't take steps 4 through 9. I did not face up to all of these selfish and self-centered character defects. I'd hurt a lot of people. I didn't make amends to them, but I mean, that was just so foreign to me, to behave in the way that we learn how to behave in this program. So of course I was destined to be miserable. And I was. But something happened, and that was that it was the 60s. And if you missed that time, I'm so sorry. It was perfect, just perfect for people like me. And just seemed that it was like that movie, The Wizard of Oz, where everything was kind of gray or sepia colored. And then there was a tornado, and then Dorothy ends up in the Emerald City. It just was all of a sudden Technicolor. And that's what happened in the 60s for me. It was helped a lot by one of those chemicals right on the shelf, 90% ethanol, which is 180 proof alcohol, a very good drink. And we used it in our experiments, and it was provided by the federal government for practically nothing. And I mean, we were supposed to use it for research, so we certainly did. It was the effects of this stuff on the human personality. So we had a great time, and we would indulge in that. People were doing a lot of other stuff too, smoking pot. I'm a pure alcoholic. The only thing that sent me to that place where I wanted to be was alcohol. Although there was all kinds of other stuff. Well, not like there is these days, but there was pot. And then there was a guy in our lab that was making a derivative of lysergic acid, just later called acid. And he would dry it on filter paper and cut it into little squares. And if there was a seminar where they were going to give a talk and show slides, he'd cut it into little pieces, and he would tell everybody, now just put a little square on your tongue before you go into the seminar, and I'll tell you, it'll bring out all the color in the slides, he said. And so we'd go into that seminar, and every now and then somebody would run out screaming at the top of their lungs. Way too much color, I'm sure. But the funny thing is, I knew that there was something inside of me so insane that it was just there, probably wanting to burst out. And I was afraid to do that because I thought, given what was happening, that that would release the insanity in me. So I never tried it. And I'm curious now, but it's way too late. So just out of curiosity, how many people have tried LSD? Oh my gosh. That is like asking how many people have been in handcuffs. You just don't get this response in the PTA. But back there in the lab, we were engaging in all kinds of research with this alcohol and other stuff. And then we'd go up on campus and try to close it down because that was the 60s. And then we'd go out at night and drink in bars. And I finally got to that place in my life where I felt like I've gotten just what I always wanted. Now, it wouldn't last very long. It would have to, just the right amount of alcohol, and I would be there right here, right now, doing what was right in front of me and having some degree of comfort. And I'd never had that in my life before. And that's what alcohol could do for me. I felt like a scientist, a real scientist, no longer a fraud when I drank. Now, in our second step, we talk about being restored to sanity. And I've often thought about that second step. Was I insane? Of course I was. I was killing myself with alcohol. And that goes so against human nature. This instinct for survival is as strong as it gets, and yet we kill ourselves somehow if we don't find this solution. So that's insane. But another form of insanity was that when I drank, I felt like a great scientist. I felt like I'm probably going to win a Nobel Prize any moment. Now, I didn't know that that was an illusion until the director, who had been saying, how's your work going? And I'd always say, just fine. He said, I want you to write it up now and give a talk to the lab. And so that's when I thumbed through my lab book and found drawings of mice, a limerick or two. There was a young man from Nantucket. Well, I didn't know what to do. This was not going to fly as a physiology project. And I had no coping skills. So what I did was I just went home, didn't tell anybody I was leaving, never went back to the lab, mailed the keys back. Sometime later, weeks after, and I guess they figured it out, but I just went home to some kind of despair. They say alcoholism is fun with problems than problems. Now my story, I laugh when we talk, my drinking career, as if you get paid to do this, a job. My drinking career, my drinking was fun and then problems. I kind of missed that part of fun with problems because I just went from that lab where everything was wonderful and then the director said, write it up, and now it's all problems. And I went home in despair. And while I was at home, I had nothing to do but drink. And my life, I just totally lost control of my life. Before long, I went to a doctor because I was so sick and wanted to find out what was wrong. I'd just wake up feeling so sick in the morning. And the doctor did some tests. I went back for the results and he said, I have some good news. And I thought, how can that be? I feel so bad. He said, you are pregnant. And I was so confused. What is this about? I think I blurted out, oh my gosh, I wonder if it's mine. And it was. And somewhere along the way, in these years of drinking in the house, we're so confused. But at some point, Bill brought his mother in because he was terrified. I mean, obviously, I couldn't cope. I couldn't be a good mother. I was not doing well in the lab, but now at home, drinking more with a little baby. He was, of course, frightened. And so my mother-in-law came, and when she got tired, my mother would come. So there was a kind of adult supervision, of which I resented terribly. I could see that they had replaced me, and it made me, instead of being grateful, just angry. I want you to go home, please, leave me alone. But they didn't. My mother was kinder. She would say, we see that you're not feeling well. I think I'll stay here and help out. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, gave me encouragement. It was, unless you get control of your life and stop drinking, we're going to lock you up and you'll never see the children again. Encouragement. And she meant business, and it scared me to death. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous in January of 1969, but that is not my sobriety date. I went to get these adults, the grandmas, to go home and leave me alone. And I didn't get a sponsor, I didn't get a go-home group, but people would take my hand and say, you're mighty intense. We know a group that's just right for you. And they would take me to this great big active group in West Los Angeles, the Pacific group. And it was scary. So I tried to keep a low profile, but they would ask a lot of questions. Do you have a sponsor? Do you have a job at this meeting? And I would try to hide in a corner. I saw some people. There was a group leader and founder named Clancy. And maybe some of you have heard him. He used to a lot of speaking, carried the message all over the world. And I could see that he was a powerful and scary figure. So I stayed on the other side of the room. But there was another person, Marion, that seemed to be some kind of goddess. She didn't seem to have the normal way of getting around. She would just kind of float into the room like an angel. And people would surround her, and she had a sense of humor, and she had a sense of purpose. And I fell in love with Marion. I just watched her and I wanted her to come over and talk to me. I just hoped that she would come over someday and say, I saw you from across the room and you fascinate me, I want to get to know you. And she wasn't doing that, and so I never talked to her, but I just watched. And then my mother-in-law went home. There were no grandmas in the house. I was going home at night, I was behaving normally. It's a funny thing, even though I did not take the steps, I was not working a program, as we say, I was being kept sober by some kind of power in this program. I'm sure that peer pressure was a lot of it. You can't drink in the meeting. And people checked up on me when I was outside of meetings. They'd call me, and somehow I was sober. And so that was convincing. And so I was left on my own. And I thought, good, I know the secret, this will not be a problem. Well, it became a problem pretty fast. Bill would come home from work, he was working hard, then he'd go back to work. But when he came home, he would expect food. And I would think, that is so much pressure, how can I do this? How can I do this? And then he'd go back to work, and somewhere between 1969 and 1972, there were more children, and at some point there were 3 of them, and they needed baths and bed and stories, and you got to do it in the right order, and it was ever too hard. And so I just had this thought, if I could have a couple of drinks, I'd do this, I could do this. And I had a couple of drinks, and I could do this. And that's all I needed to get me to that place of steadiness, of comfort, so that I could do what was right in front of me and function pretty well. And then that was making food. But now the bed, baths, story, right order, how can I do that? Well, if I could have a few more drinks, I could do that too. And I think that worked for a little while. I don't remember it too well because often we'd all end up in one of the beds. Bill would come home from work and he wasn't too worried. And then what I remember is that it was sort of out of control and I was spending a lot of time in the garage, drinking in the garage, and the grandmas had started coming back. And now I had a few years of that. It's a funny thing, having been in Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew that that was a place where people went to stay sober, but I was really very sick by that time, was drinking daily, incapable of taking care of anybody in the family. And yet I had the thought, if it ever gets bad enough, I could go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's also a part of the insanity that we have. And so many of us, sadly, never get bad enough. And I think tonight here, we're the lucky ones. Somehow we got bad enough to surrender to this fellowship. And we have sobriety. And there's a little bit of a hump in making that surrender, but then the gifts that follow. And it's just so sad that as a practicing alcoholic, there was no way I could experience the gifts without the surrender. And the surrender is only the first part, as Carl Jung found out when he talked with the hopeless Roland Hazard. You need a conversion experience. We need to wake up. We need a spiritual awakening. And I was reaching that point of surrender. For me, it was absolute loneliness. I spent a lot of time in the garage in those last months, years. And I just wanted somebody to talk to me. And I could call central office, LA central office, and they would talk to me, but then they'd want to get off the phone. Because they'd always ask that horrible question, do you drink? Do you have a problem with alcohol? And of course I would always say, no, I just want somebody to talk to me. And then they'd say, well, I've got to get off the phone now, leave the lines open for the suffering alcoholic. Well, this morning the person asked me that question, do you drink? And I said, no, but I just want you to talk to me. I'm so lonely, so lonely. And she said, I'll talk to you. And she talked to me for a while. And then she said, have you had a drink yet today? And I said, oh, no, I don't drink. Oh, yes, I understand. She said, yeah, you want somebody to talk to you. Let me tell you, she said, this is an organization here, and we have talkers. We'll send somebody to your house to talk to you. Would you like a talker to visit you? And I said, yes, I'm lonely. And so she sent Lorena, a talker, and Lorena talked. She was just like Bill Wilson when he visited Dr. Bob. He talked about himself, and Lorena talked about herself, and she wasn't scary like my mother, like my mother-in-law, like my husband, anybody who was not an alcoholic. She talked about drinking, she talked about losing her job, she talked about threatening her family, and I felt sorry for her. So sad, but then she claimed that she's happy now because she's sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she has to go to a meeting, she said, and she'd love to take me along to a meeting. And I said, oh no, I just wanted somebody to talk to me. And she said, well, we've been talking. We talked for a long time. And because we talked for so long, the friend I usually go with is not available. And I can't go alone. I mean, I always go with my friend. And so I'm in danger if I don't go to my meetings. That's so much a part of sobriety. Would you just do me this favor and come with me so I can do what I need to stay sober, because that's where my happiness is. And I thought, she's begging me. I've got to rise to the occasion. I've got to help her out. So I said I would go along, and we went to this little place, Serenity Manor in Santa Monica, 26th and Broadway. And I said, here, I'll sit on the porch. And she said, no, the scary part's walking inside. You have to walk in with me. And she grabbed my hand, pulled me up to the front row, and here we were at this meeting. And I don't know what went on in the first half, but the leader got up that night and said, tonight our main speaker is Marion. And I looked, and there was my goddess of sobriety. Now, how can that happen? I don't know. I have a science background. I did not, I was pretty much an agnostic. I just didn't think about it, but anything about God seems so impossible, and like, you can't do experiments on it. So I didn't attribute it to higher power or anything mystical, except there was mystery. I thought in terms of science that if this is some kind of distribution here, it must be about 10 standard deviations out. I mean, that Marion would be there. And that changed me. Because that happened, I thought, there's something here I don't understand. It is mysterious, and it's good, and I want to hold on to that. And she told my story, and afterwards I ran up and I said, would you be my sponsor? She talked about sponsorship, and she said it would be a privilege. And I've often thought about that. What other group could you go into? Country club, Rotary club, walk up to a complete stranger and say, can I turn my life over to you? I might be calling you at all hours of the night. Marion said it would be a privilege. Probably don't hear that in other clubs. And it was just like Chris talked about tonight. What happened was that Marion gave me her time. And that was so valuable. And that saved my life. I've had three different sponsors. I've never told a sponsor to leave. My sponsors have gone. Marion moved away, and my second sponsor passed away, and I have a third sponsor now. And each sponsor has been perfect for that particular time in my sobriety. It was things like that that opened me up to the idea that if I take these steps and I draw in the idea that there might be a higher power here and ask for help from that higher power, give my will and my life over to that higher power, that it might be a good thing, it might be a real thing. Marion gave me a foundation. She led me through the steps, and I'm a great believer in steps 4 through 9. I believe that that is what causes that transformation that we need to have happen, that Carl Jung talked about, that spiritual experience, that spiritual awakening. And when that happens, this deep and terrible thirst for alcohol is transformed into a thirst for recovery, for helping for carrying the message to other people. We become different human beings. We become transformed. So I'm a great believer in the steps. I don't believe we can do them alone. If we could buy a big book. We could take off to a cave, a beach, all alone, recover. But somehow this thing that we call higher power seems to have to work in fellowship, one alcoholic talking to another. With recovery, I got to go back to work. I made amends. I made a lifetime of amends to the family. As I said, there were 3 children by the time I got sober. And they began to grow up under the influence of Alcoholics Anonymous. Becky and Susie, our 2 daughters, married and had a bunch of grandchildren, and so I got to see the first steps and first words the second time around, so that was pretty wonderful. Our son David became a very good athlete and started a business with his professor in college, and had a beautiful wife, so the family was doing well. Bill and I were getting along. I had stopped thinking of Bill as the scientist in my life, but just plain Bill. And life was very sweet. It was so sweet that I was kind of drifting away from Alcoholics Anonymous. I've often thought that what binds us to the program often is tragedy, hard times, because we talk to one another and the program holds us in. But sometimes the gifts of sobriety can be the very thing that tempt us to leave. In fact, I made amends to the director of that lab, and he invited me back to that lab to work there. And there were deadlines, and there would be reasons sometimes to miss a meeting. Because life was so good and everything was going well. But things were turning gray. They just weren't as much fun as they had been before. When I was fairly new, when I was working with Marion, where I was participating in all the activities in this big active group. And I didn't know why. I just thought, it's probably that I'm working too hard. Maybe I better work a little bit harder and get a promotion, get a better job. It was all focused outward on the world and what I can get from the world now. And of course, I was drifting away from the program. Luckily, a couple of people spotted what was wrong. You better get back. We haven't seen you at your regular meetings. I was going to meetings, but I don't think I was sponsoring very many people, maybe 1 or 2 at the time. Definitely drifting away. And luckily, my friends reminded me, and I kind of apologized. By that time, I'd had a spiritual awakening. I knew that there is a higher, who could doubt it after a while? And so I kind of apologized, and I said to my higher power, put me to work. I don't know how to be able to work in service. My favorite character defect is sloth, so help me. And I got the word. At first I thought maybe something like turning myself into Mother Teresa in Calcutta. But people said, well, you have a family, you're not Catholic, you don't know the language of India, maybe just getting more active in the program, why not that? And that's what I did. I returned to the Pacific group. I was about 14 years sober, and at that point, Clancy became my sponsor. I'd always been afraid of him, but people kept saying, you need a sponsor and it should be Clancy. You need to have a good example in front of you. And that's exactly what I needed at that time in my sobriety. To watch somebody being completely turned over to service and to see the kind of joy that that kind of life results in. And so I certainly stepped up my program, and the more involved I became, the more exciting life became, and the more comfortable I got. And I began to sponsor people again, and had an AA family, which I have to this day. And I attribute my sobriety as much to my sponsees as I do my sponsor. And they are the ones that I have to stay sober for, carry the message to. When I was about 40 years sober, life was very good, and I'd gone to State Line. And we talked about State Line amongst some of us tonight. I think some of you may be familiar with that. That's a big 4-day AA intense set of meetings that covers a lot of AA topics in Las Vegas around the turn of the year. And I had gone there, was talking about step 2 on Friday night. And as I got down from the podium, there were a lot of phone calls. And our daughters were calling, they were trying to reach their brother David. His wife was calling me, have you heard from David? He didn't come home from work. Nobody could find David. And by 11 o'clock that night, police had gone into his office and found that he had hanged himself. And we will never know why that happened. He seemed to have a good life. He might have had the kind of personality that I had. He had no reaction to alcohol, no relief from alcohol. So he may have had my personality where I never did get just what I always wanted. I didn't know what it was at some point, but I just know I didn't get it. And the closer I got to what I thought would make me happy, like working in the lab, I was worse than ever. Maybe that was it. We don't know. He left no note. But my world came to an end at that point. Luckily, I had a strong sponsor at that time, Clancy. And if something like that happens to you, it's good if you have a sponsor whose direction you take. And he just said to me, you have 40 years of sobriety, you have a program, and your family does not. And you'll have 2 or 3 years of hard grief. But your role will be to help them get through this time, and the program will make sure that you get through this time. So drive home tonight and start taking care of your family, take care of your husband. And I did that. I drove across the desert, and I had a CD in the car to listen to, and it was the great Sandy Beach, and I use his last name because we lost him a few years ago. And his 2 daughters had died the year before. One of our disease, the other was murdered in the front yard. So I knew what he was talking about. He said, when that kind of thing happens, you go out to your higher power. And you have time before you deeply react, and you say to your higher power, stay with me, I won't leave you. And form that bond tighter than ever. And when you do go into deep grief, guess who comes back with you? And he was absolutely right, and I practiced that. And the next day I got a call from Julie St. J, a good friend in my home group. And she had lost her son 10 years before, and I knew she knew what she was talking about. And she said, accept. If you can accept this, you will find that there will be blessings that follow. And I thought, that can't be. There can never be blessings. I can't accept this. And she said, acceptance doesn't mean approval. It just means cooperate with reality. That's all. And when we're in this program, I think that we're forced to do that. We're led to do that. We're carried through that process, because I couldn't make that the centerpiece of my life and stop living there and dwell only on that. But I couldn't deny it either, because we show up, we tell the truth, and we talk to other people, we share. And so I was forced to share that over and over again, but I couldn't stay there. And so I was just forced into cooperating with reality. That was 2011, so that was quite a few years ago, 15 years ago. And that wound has become a scar. And Julie was absolutely right that there are blessings from anything that happens to us in Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe that higher power walks us through whatever we go through and can turn goodness into whatever circumstance we have. Not that it was good that we lost our son. That's a terrible tragedy. But there have been blessings, and one of the first was that I listened a lot more carefully than I did before. What did I miss that I might have heard David say that would have given us some indication that he suffered so terribly? I listened. And I have a kind of resilience too. The worst of all possible things happened to me. And therefore, nothing has really thrown me since then, because I know that cooperate with reality, just keep moving ahead. The program and higher power gets us through, walks us through whatever we need to walk through. A kind of resilience. There was a later loss about 6 years ago. My sweet Bill, after almost 61 years together, passed away. And he had come to believe, just by hearing me talk over and over with sponsees about turning it over to higher power, he began to do that. And he said he would meet me on the other side, and I believe that might be true. And then a year after that, Clancy passed away. That's a strange thing. I was around 50 years sober at the time. My sobriety date is February 8th, 1972, so that was close to 50. And I just thought, how could I ever get another sponsor? Here I had this very dynamic, fully invested in AA sponsor, Clancy. I just probably have to rely on friends, and that's okay. I have good friends. But I was at a retreat 2 weeks after Clancy passed away, and it was given by a person in Oakland, Father Tom W., and he does a lot of retreats that I go to. He does what he calls 12-step friendly retreats, and I've been kind of a groupie through the years. Longtime sober person, sober alcoholic. And he just said out of the blue, you know, I'll sponsor anyone. They often don't call me, but I'll sponsor them. And I thought, my goodness, he could be my sponsor. He says he'll sponsor anyone. I'm anyone. So I wrote out this long resume and sent it to him, and he just sent me some telephone numbers and said he'd be my sponsor. And so I have had this absolutely delightful sponsor for the past 5 years. And it's so reminiscent of Bill Wilson. He was at a low point in 1940, and he had been forced to move into the clubhouse because they had lost their house on Clinton Street. They had no money. They'd published a lot of copies of the big book and nobody was buying them. That was before the Jack Alexander article. And people in the Cleveland AA were accusing him of financial shenanigans. My goodness, he was so depressed, and he was just sitting on his bed. And then the worst thing he could imagine happened was that the person downstairs who was kind of minding the store said, an old drunk wants to talk to you. And it was 10 o'clock at night, and he just thought, oh no, now I have to sit up and listen to somebody else. And this person staggered up the stairs and came in and sat down, and he wasn't an old drunk. He was staggering because he had a joint disease that caused him to have a lot of trouble walking. It was hard for him to get up the stairs, and as he sat down, his coat fell open, and he was a Jesuit Catholic priest, Father Ed Dowling, and he became a great friend of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Bill called him his spiritual advisor, sometimes called him his sponsor. Although he was not an alcoholic, he was just a great friend of the fellowship. And that was kind of my father, Ed Dowling. Tom is a Jesuit Catholic priest, and he fills that role that I think that Father Ed did for Bill Wilson. He's a spiritual advisor in the sense of, lighten up. I was taking everything very seriously. I mean, this is a serious program, and of course it is. It's a life and death program. But a part of my seriousness was taking care of all of you and making sure you were doing it right. I kind of felt like the AA police sometime. And he works a big Al-Anon program, and he has just pointed out that other people can live their own life and they can do well without my direction and interference. Now, if I sponsor people and they ask a question, of course I share experience, strength, and hope, but I don't have to take care of everybody in my home group. And that just frees up about 90% of the day. And so he says, go out and garden. And he's kind of an amateur gardener. And I've been at his place, and he shows me these flowers that he grows. And I didn't look at flowers before, and I've started looking at flowers. I am so grateful for the influence he's been on my life, because as Becky and I were driving through these streets here in Denver, I saw these magnificent trees that you have, and the gardens, and the green, and it is so lovely here. And I think that I was oblivious to so much of that before, and he has opened my eyes to that. So that's been a tremendous blessing, the perfect sponsor for this time in my sobriety. Another thing that happened, there were a couple of very strong people, Millie and Clancy in our group, sort of the matriarch and patriarch, and they passed away at about the same time and left a whole bunch of orphans. I was one of them. As we all went out to find sponsors again, I began to sponsor some of these people who had a little less sobriety. And some of them are very active in the program, and they too have drawn me into a lot more activity to try to keep up with my sponsees. One is up in Concord in the Bay Area in California, Debbie, and she and her husband love to travel. And they go on all kinds of trips and always do some AA stuff there. And I never did that kind of thing. As I said, I was too busy taking care of everybody else and worrying about them. But they're able to enjoy life quite a bit. And so they plan these trips and always take a whole bunch of literature. We see what we can do in AA when we take these trips. And sometimes they invite me to go along. And one of these trips was to Egypt. I'd never been there before. I don't even know whether I'd been out of the country before that. But we went to Egypt, and here's Grandma riding a camel. And then you can go in pyramids, these great big structures in Egypt, and you can actually go through these passages up to chambers with hieroglyphics on the wall. It's so magical. And I went in with another couple, 5 of us went together. And I was having so much fun, but the other couple seemed to be a little bit worried. And I said, this is not scary, this is fun. I mean, see, we can crawl through this little passage on our hands and knees, and there's a bat cave. I mean, this is wonderful. But they were worried, and I finally got them to confess what they were worried about. And they said, well, you're so old, and we're afraid you're going to have a heart attack and die, and we don't know how we can get you out of here. And I thought, yes, I see the dilemma. But then I thought, think of where we are. This is a pyramid. I mean, it's basically a tomb. It's perfect. Leave me here. And then they got happy, and we had a good time, and we all got out. As you was really fun and good. Another thing that happened as a result of the pandemic is that wherever the internet exists in the world, AA is possible. We have expanded all over the world, and our home group has one in particular, a person who was born in Japan, Yuko, who is very, very fluent in both English and Japanese, and she can do simultaneous interpretation. She started having a little meeting during the pandemic because we couldn't get out to meetings, and she had some Japanese sponsees. And I've always been fascinated by Japan, even though I'd never gone to Japan, and the language of Japan with its 2 alphabets and plus kanji. I mean, it's just mystical and wonderful. So I said, could I come to your Japanese meeting? I wanted to hear good Japanese. And she said, of course you could. And there were 5 or 6 of us that were meeting virtually by Zoom. And they were so polite that they began to translate the Japanese for me in the chat. Well, that began to grow, and some people heard about it in Japan because they knew Yuko, and they asked if they could sign on. So we moved it to a time that was convenient for Japan and the United States. And that now has grown to our Thursday night meeting that has between 50 and 100 people every Thursday. And now it's a bilingual meeting because you can have 2 channels with Zoom, and so people can hear the meeting in Japanese or hear it in English because we have interpreters. And that has been so exciting for us and also for Japan that they have begun to hear the speakers from the States, and they did not have that kind of richness before. They didn't hear about traditions and steps in the way that we do, home group, sponsorship, and now they formed this very active series of meetings incorporating some of these basic ideas that we have, studying our traditions, studying the steps, taking them. And now they have just had their 4th annual conference. I just went back to the 4th annual conference in Japan. I've been to Japan 5 times recently because I love what's happening there. Again, the result of something ever so terrible, the pandemic that closed us all down and took the lives of many of us. And yet, blessings came even from that, this blessing of the outreach to Japan, the outreach all over the world. That has been such a sweet addition to my sobriety. Another thing that has happened, and I'm not sure why, but perhaps it's just because of amends to the family. We are a very close family now. And I got a phone call from my favorite grandson. There's 4 grandsons, and they're all my favorites, each one. And favorite Andy called up about 2 years ago, and he said, Grandma, I just graduated from college. Could I move in with you? I got a job in downtown Los Angeles. And I said, of course, Adam, I would love to have you come in. And he did take that job. And he has moved in, and it has been so much fun. I have this young man, my grandson. I'm 5 feet 1 inch tall, and I'm not very strong. And he's 6 feet tall, and he's a rock climber with upper body strength. So he can reach high things, and he can lift heavy things, and he's perfect. And moreover, I have gone out to movies with him, and we go to concerts together, and he's not ashamed to be out with Grandma. It's been such fun, but he was a little bit sad. And he was sad because he left his girlfriend of quite a few years back in Iowa. They had gone to school together. And I said, would you like for Samantha to move here with us? And he said, yes. And she was on a plane the next day. So she moved in some time ago. And I am actually Reverend Marilyn, Universal Life Minister, $98 on the internet. And what you can do with that is actually marry people legally. And so he got on his knees, he proposed to Samantha, and we had a big wedding with the two families, and Reverend Marilyn pronounced those vows. By the power vested in me by the state of California, I pronounce you man and wife. So they've been living in wedded bliss there with me, the three of us with our cat Ziva. And it is full of great sweetness. I missed David, though. I thought that I would have our son David in my old age, and that was not to be. And it just left a big gap that I thought would never be filled. But here Adam moved in, and he fills that gap. He's definitely not David. He's very much Adam. But he fills that deep need. This program has really given me that thing I looked to alcohol for, which was to be comfortable right here, right now, doing just exactly what I'm doing. Not all the time, but those moments last longer, and they become ever more frequent as time goes by with recovery. And the program also has given me everything that I need. Sometimes I don't even know that I need it until I get it. But as I get all of these needs met, more and more I have the sure knowledge that I've gotten just what I always wanted to. And for that I am grateful to you. Thank you.
Marilyn. Let's close the meeting with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can,